You keep hearing over and over again that sedans are dead, but it seems like no one told that to these two. The Maruti Suzuki Dzire sold over 1.67 lakh units in 2024, and Honda's gone to the trouble of creating an all-new Amaze. Now both these cars are very new and very popular, so it's only fair to ask which of these is the best. The Dzire and Amaze are within millimeters of each other. It may not look like it, but the Dzire is 25 mm taller, which shows that Maruti Suzuki has done a pretty good job of creating a proportional shape of this small sub 4 meter footprint. The Amaze, on the other hand, has quite some presence with the big upright grille and large boxy lighting. The Amaze's shrunk city theme makes it a touch more upright than ideal, but there is a reason to this, as we will see later. The Amaze has 9 mm more ground clearance than the Dzire, 172 mm, which always helps. Now with the Dzire, you get 382 litres of boot space. That's not too much more than what you used to get with the last gen model, and you notice that the lip is quite low. So if I have a big heavy bag, I can quite easily lift it up, and a few of them for your family road trip will fit. But it's the Amaze that is genuinely more practical in this regard. At least you get 416 litres, and if you just look at it, it's much deeper. Overall, the space is much wider. Yes, both of them have these wheel wells that come in the way, but otherwise, this is the better package for a family road trip, and you also have a wider opening. And another nice touch is that you get padding here on the lid, which you don't see very often even in some bigger sedans. Now this is a bit odd. With the Dzire, you can't actually open the boot even though there is a request sensor. What you do need is the key in your hand. Only then the boot opens. But with the Amaze, there's no such problem. You can just open it like in any other car. The more practical space does mean that the Amaze seems to end more abruptly, although even at the rear it has more presence with the large city-like lamps. The Desire's better proportions are also continued here. Now both these cars try to give you that upmarketish sedan experience within the cabin too. And at first glance, I think the Dzire does it slightly better. You notice that with the more vibrant feeling that's in the cabin. So you have a bit more texture here, a bit more user-wearing sort of finishes. For example, this forward, this is a bit more silver here than in the Amaze. So yeah, you feel like you're in a more expensive car at first glance. But having said that, you have that tough, functional Japanese sense from both these cars. And the Honda sort of enhances that to an extent with the switchgear. For example, the AC vents have a bit more heft to them, same with the buttons on the steering wheel. So in that sense, the Amaze does better. And yeah, even the plastics, while they do seem of a tougher grade in the Amaze, the panel gaps itself, I think the Maruti does it a little bit better. They're a bit more consistent in the Dzire. The Amaze's part digital instrumentation feels quite a few steps ahead of the simple analog dials in the Dzire. The large screen and steering mounted buttons make it much easier to navigate on the move. Conversely, the small MID in the Dzire uses old school stocks and is often locked out through alerts like the turn-by-turn navigation. The Amaze also has a more configurable trip computer. The situation is reversed with the touchscreen. The Amaze's 8-inch screen feels like it's from a couple of generations ago. It's slow to respond, the display lacks brightness and contrast and catches glare easily. You also don't get a wireless phone mirroring function. The Desire's 9-inch unit makes life much easier with the wireless function, sharper display, and is much more responsive and thoughtfully laid out. As you might expect, it's the Honda that is slightly more practical. The door bins hold stuff easier. The wireless charger is better placed. You have a bit more space for you in the central sort of tunnel. The Dzire may be smaller inside, but it makes up for this by offering some popular features like a sunroof and the more modern screen. Other than this, here's what you can expect from both. Now with both these cars, very often you or your family members will be spending time in the back seat. And in that scenario, if you're traveling 4 up very often, then the Amaze really does score some points over the Dzire. We just tried sitting 3 abreast and it was much easier to fit in the Amaze than in the Dzire. The Amaze, just aside from its slightly wider bench, It also has slightly nicer contouring, so even though it's quite flat, you do feel that the cushioning is slightly firmer. There's a bit more thigh support, so you will be more comfortable. And then just generally in terms of its volume, it feels more spacious. It has a little bit more knee room than in the Dzire, so you can sort of spread out a bit more. The footwells seem a little bit wider, so to speak, and even the central hump is slightly lower. Similarly, you have a larger window, and the roof just feels like it's of a slightly higher height. So overall, it's a brighter, more spacious feeling in the Amaze. Now both will give you a center armrest, and I just feel that this has a typical Honda thing of how it rests directly on the seat. So yeah, for me this is a bit too low. In that sense, the Dzire has a slightly more comfortable armrest, but you get a third headrest with the Amaze. Now just like in the front, you do find that the Amaze is a bit lacking in terms of features at the back. The sound quality isn't that great of the music system, which is one thing. And you also find that you don't get any charging ports. So there's just a 12-volt socket, which is going to be a bit of a pain in this day and age. The Maruti Suzuki gives you TPMS and a 360-degree camera. Notably, the Dzire is the first NCAP rated 5-star car from the brand. The new Amaze hasn't been tested yet, but it's the only one here with ADAS. This is a basic system but works well enough to add a further layer of security. Although the camera and side view monitor in the Amaze aren't as clear as in the Dzire. Now while the Dzire may not have outright space, it does make you feel a bit more comfortable on the move. The suspension setup, Maruti has really found a very good balance, I must say. So over the usual typically Indian road surfaces, you find that it's a bit better. So over uneven city roads or say a broken patch, the car is much more level, the Maruti Suzuki. You don't find yourself being sort of moved around as you would find in the Amaze. And even over say expansion joints or slightly bigger bumps, you find that the Dzire filters it out a bit better. The Amaze, it sort of crashes through them, which doesn't feel really quite nice or comfortable. Both the cars here come with a 1.2-litre engine and a 5-speed manual, but a significant difference now is that the Dzire has moved to the new 3-cylinder Z-series engine, while the Amaze continues to be a 4-cylinder. The Amaze has the edge on paper with its 90 PS and 110 mm, while the Dzire has a slight torque advantage with its 82 PS and 112 Nm. But as our real-world acceleration times show, there's not much to choose between these in outright performance. The clutch on the Dzire isn't as progressive as we would like it to be, so it's a bit difficult in that car. And of course the gear shifts, Honda's legendary for that. They have a degree of precision that the Maruti Suzuki somewhat lacks. And yeah, it becomes very easy to slot into gear, and very light of course. Now Maruti Suzuki has done some work on refining this new motor from when it first debuted on the Swift, but it's still some way behind the smooth, near-silent operation that the Amaze manages at low speeds. There is still notable vibrations at idle and a gruff note, although the difference reduces as you rev both engines out. But the Dzire has one big trick up its sleeve which more or less seals the deal. The new motor is astonishingly efficient. You can expect over 20 kmpl in regular driving without much effort. The Amaze can't get anywhere near this with its 15 km per litre overall efficiency. Now the Dzire might not be that easy to get off the line, but once it's on the move, it actually has slightly better low-end performance, very marginally. But then it's pretty much the Honda that shines with that really quite potent mid-range. You're sometimes caught by surprise by just how much torque this car is putting out in the mid-range, especially when you know that this isn't a turbo like many other cars are at this price point. Which means that driving around in the city, or even when you want to say pick up speed on the highway, it's a bit easier in the Amaze. And I must say that both do keep pulling to about say 5,500, but then sort of flatten out towards the red line. Yes, this Amaze has a slightly higher red line. It revs to 6,500, unlike the 6,000 of the Maruti Suzuki, but I don't think that will be much of a bother to any of you. Now the Amaze's better mid-range ability is sort of highlighted by the Dzire's shortcomings. It has a bit of a dull spot, say around 2.5 to 3,000 RPM. That can get a bit pronounced once you've lived with the Dzire for a long time. It's amazingly tractable. You can use third gear for most of your city driving, while the Dzire needs a bit more shifting. We saw the Amaze go from the high teens to over 120 kmph in just this one gear. The Amaze's blockier front and slightly higher seating makes it a bit better in terms of maneuverability in traffic, but with their compact sizes, both these cars feel right at home on our tight streets. This might come as a bit of a surprise considering there's a Honda at the other end, but it's this Dzire that actually feels the more fun to drive. Now the Dzire, for example, feels a lot more cohesive, a lot better tied down, which is quite surprising considering this also has the more mature ride quality. Anyway, you find that the Dzire rolls much less than the Amaze. There is a more cohesive, tied down feel to it, which is really quite fun. It gives you that sprightly, fun nature that you have somehow in most Maruti Suzuki cars. That's still very much retained. Over uneven surfaces, you find that the Honda wallows a bit. Around corners, the Amaze can find it more difficult to contain its mass within itself, whereas the Dzire feels more secure. Generally, the Amaze feels like the heftier car, although the Dzire has closed the gap from earlier noticeably. It feels a touch more direct, it feels a bit more natural in how it recenters. Thankfully, the Dzire actually recenters unlike a lot of earlier Marutis, so that's good. And both of them also weigh up pretty similarly on the highway to give you a fairly secure, if not very direct feel. And then when you do speak about braking, there too, both of them are within meters of each other in terms of our tested times, so there's really not much to choose. Priced at 11.27 lakh for this top ZXi Plus trim, the Maruti Suzuki Dzire is 46,000 less than the Honda Amaze ZX seen here. Yes, the Amaze is the more practical car with the more refined, tractable motor, but the Dzire seems to just edge it with its great mileage, more modern features and better driving dynamics. And for those of you who believe that sedans just don't cut it anymore, both these cars seem as relevant as ever on our roads.